to this week's presentation from the DBA Fundamental Group. This week is Generative AI Foundations for DBAs with the awesome Warner Chaves. Today is September 17th, 2024. So welcome again to DBA Fundamentals. On the top right-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the three leaders of the DBA Fundamentals Group, Steve Cantrell, Shane O'Neill, and myself, Kevin Wilkie. And to the right is our X handles, if you ever need to get hold of us for any reason. Below that is the various ways you can get hold of us on social media. First up is Meetup, where you can, well, hopefully most of you found us today. Actually found all of our presentations as well, and any of our upcoming ones. Below that is our website, dbafund.com, where you can see all of our past presentations, our upcoming presentations, all of that funness. Below that is our YouTube site, dbafundtube.com, where it actually is a link to YouTube, where you can actually see all of our goodness. Be sure to like and subscribe to our page so that you can actually get the videos whenever they come out, which will be in 2 to 3 days. At least that's what I try for anyway. Below that is obviously our X handle, DBA Fun, and our Slack channel and LinkedIn groups. So you can see all of the fun that goes on with DBA Fundamentals. Below that is our upcoming conferences. Past 2024 Data Community Summit is coming up rather soon. Today is the last day that you can actually buy it for the reduced price. After, I think, starting tomorrow, it's 2,500 something US dollars for it. Be sure, if you want to do it today. This is obviously for anyone live. After that, so sorry. Also coming up rather soon, actually next week, is the European Microsoft Fabric Community Conference. So if you're in Europe or have any reason to be in Stockholm, probably nice to be finding a reason to be in Stockholm. And you want to learn about Fabric, now's the time to do it. It does happen rather soon, so you better get on that so you can make it happen. Please remember to turn off your video and mute yourself. I'll be doing so here in just a minute so we can focus on Warner. Any questions you have, please be sure to type into the chat, and we'll ask Warner as it comes up, or Warner can always go and look through the chat himself. All good. So with that, I'll pass it over to Warner. Warner, take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm going to start sharing my screen here, and we'll go into the PowerPoint. I promise I have almost no slides, and then we'll just do a very practical session. Feel free to put your questions there on the chat playground, and we'll get going. So generative AI for DBAs. DBAs, do you guys are my people? I started as a DBA a long time ago. And then I've done a bunch of different things, DBAing, consulting, and that's why I always come back to, you know, trying to pump out the crowd, the DBA crowd, especially all the new tech that is always coming up here in our industry. So the agenda for today, I wanted to introduce main concepts and ideas just to give everybody a lay of the land kind of thing about Gen AI and some of the use case that I've seen with DBAs as well. Myself, I work for Pythian, and we have a big database administration practice services still, and I've seen a lot of the cool stuff that the guys can do, and I wanted to show some of that today as well, right? So we're going to do a quick Gen AI intro. We'll talk about some of the use cases that I see for DBAs, and then we'll do some demos, and hopefully you guys will, you know, find the ideas interesting, play around on your own. Some of the tools are free. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. I was talking with Kevin about it right before we started the session and the recording about, you know, what you might be allowed to do or not allowed to do with the free tools depending on your company, but you know, we can talk about that as well. So allow me to introduce myself. I'm been in the IT industry for about 18 years. I'm a data solutions architect here at Pythian. Like I said, I started as a DBA back in Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard has a big delivery center in Costa Rica, my home country. I live in Canada now with my wife and my kids, and I am now a Microsoft AI Platform MVP. I've been a data platform MVP for 9 years. This one was the first year where Microsoft switched my award category, so I'm really proud to now be in the group of the AI Platform MVPs. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or my email. Check out my employer's website as well, Pythian.com. Our blog has a bunch of really cool resources as well. And feel free to search me and add me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with anybody that's part of my sessions. All right. So let's start with this Gen AI and tools that are available today, right? And what's happened is Gen AI has taken the IT industry by storm. I'm sure most of you are probably tired at this point here, like, oh, AI, right? It's just overtaken the whole narrative of IT in the last couple of years. I think ChatGPT debuted, I think it was November of 2022. That's when like the first version came out to the public, and then it was just a big boom after that, right? I did want to talk about some of the major players. As you go a little bit deeper into the Gen AI space, you will run into most likely these names here. These four names are the biggest four names right now. So OpenAI, right, is the creator of ChatGPT and the GPT family of models, and they are famously partnered with Microsoft so that you can only get GPT models exclusively in Azure. And this is one of the ways that some people might be able to convince their bosses to let them use AI if they're not allowed to do it today. And I can talk a little bit about that further down in the demos. I'll go into like the Azure experience, not like the like more public Copilot or ChatGPT experience. There's another startup. Well, it's not a startup anymore. These companies are worth billions of dollars now. But there's another company in the AI space called Anthropic that's also headquarters also in San Francisco. And Anthropic creates this family of models called Claude, and they're a really big competitor to OpenAI, and they are partnered with both Google and AWS. So you can get the cloud-hosted private version of Anthropic's models if you use Google Cloud or AWS. Um, Google famously, obviously, Google being a big company in the machine learning AI space, they have their own first-party model called Gemini. Um, they spend quite a bit of money in development and marketing of Gemini as well. And then, interestingly, Meta, the company that makes Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, they also released the best open source LLM. It's called Llama. I believe the latest version of Llama is something like 3.1. So they're on the third version of the Llama model, and it is considered the best open source LLM that you can get. And by open source, it means that you can host it yourself. They provide the file with all the weights. Anybody can download it off of the internet. And so because of that, all the other providers like Google, AWS, or Microsoft, they also provide hosted versions of Llama as well, right? Or you can run it yourself, right? Uh, we have some customers that run the Llama model in their own like Kubernetes cluster, for example, because it's not commercially licensed, so you can run it in your own compute if you wanted to. So those are the main ones that you might be thinking about if you start looking into this. And really where to pick one or the other, I'm going to show them all or most of them in the demos. It's mostly about trying to make the best of what you have available and what you're allowed to use by your company, really, right? So Gen AI Stack 2. So it's not just one thing, right? The whole idea of Gen AI now requires a bunch of different things, right? So there's a whole new generation of tools, right? So when I say people are using Gen AI, we have the chat playgrounds, right? So things like using like ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude, just like on a web portal, and you just go in and you talk to whatever, and it comes out. So that's like one of the major, or probably the most common tool that you will be using if you don't want to like go deeper into it, and you will probably get a lot of value even just doing that. uh, then we also have like AI studios. These are more like to, they have more control, more gears towards developers. I think if you're really serious about it, maybe, and especially if your company doesn't allow you to use some of the public tools, then the AI studios could turn into like your main go-to instead of a chat playground. And I'm going to show kind of like the differences there as well. If you were to go even deeper into, working with Gen AI, probably most DBAs would not go further down than the AI studios. Um, but if you are actually trying to develop something, so more geared towards developers, then you would need like testing and evaluation libraries for Gen AI. You would look at LLM orchestration. That's like how when you structure some kind of program that maybe takes data from one place, takes data from another, mixes it in some way, and then passes it through to an LLM and so on, right? That's what's called LLM orchestration. And then now people are actually developing and deploying production applications with Gen AI. And so, similar to how we have, DevOps and data ops and ML ops, now people are coming up with the idea of LLM ops too, right? So you have pipelines to do the orchestration of the LLM, and then you also have monitoring of the LLM. You have source control of the prompts. You have content safety filters on it. You might have output validation of the model's answer and all that kind of stuff. And so all of this now falls under the umbrella of LLM ops too, right? So if you just want to use it and consume it as an end user, even if as a DBA, most likely you'll stay with just the chat playgrounds or the AI studios. But if you want to go deeper on it, I mean, I encourage people to just go as far as they're passionate about it, and for sure you will get a lot of value out of it. But most likely the top two will be more in the DBA universe, and the bottom three will be more in the developer kind of universe, right? So some basic concepts here, just the minimum so that we can just jump ahead into the demos, right? So the models, right? So for example, a lot of people get confused with, you know, OpenAI. Oh, I want ChatGPT in Azure. And it's like, well, it's not ChatGPT in Azure, right? ChatGPT is OpenAI's product, is the web portal, is everything that is like consumer facing. Underneath ChatGPT, we have the GPT family of models. And there's a big array of different models that are part of the GPT family of models. And we'll look at that in the demos coming up in a little bit. But it's important to separate then the end user consumer product, right, which is ChatGPT, with the actual model, which is the GPT model that you can host in Azure as well without the actual ChatGPT product, right? Gemini would be the model on the Google side. And for example, there's like 3 or 4 flavors of Gemini too on Google, right? There's the flagship Gemini. Then there's one called, like, I think it's called Gemini Flash, which is supposed to be, it's not as sophisticated, but it's faster. That's why it's called Flash. There's another one, I forget the name. I don't know if it's Gemini Mini or something like that, that is supposed to be smaller so that uh, it can be run on like smaller compute and all this kind of stuff, right? So Llama, for example, that's the meta model that you can have open source. So these are the models themselves, right? This is the actual ML model that's been trained with all the different text, all the different images, and so on, and that's what you use to generate the responses. Now, another thing that's been going on since people started playing around with ChatGPT and the GPT models is the idea of prompt engineering, right? So you might hear this a lot as you go into the AI rabbit hole. Is people talking about prompt engineering, which is really a fancy word to say you need to learn how to talk to the AI, right? That's all it is. Prompt engineering is how good or how descriptive can you be to let the AI know exactly what it is, right? So something that I find really is that technical people, like you guys on the call today, DBAs, are really good at understanding this. That the computer is not like some magical uh, artifact, right? So when you want something, you have to be as specific as you can possibly be, right? I find more like this idea is more difficult for non-technical people, right? I see it, for example, with my own family, my non-technical family members. A lot of times they try to use AI and then they come back and they're not really that impressed. And then I'm like, okay, well, what did you ask for? And they're like, oh, I asked for this. And I was like, and they totally gave me this nonsense. I'm like, yeah, because you asked something that's like so broad and so general. Like it's a computer program. It's not gonna read your mind, right? So there's all these assumptions that people sometimes don't put into the text, and then they get kind of disappointed, right? So prompt engineering is really about like really structuring well what you want the model to generate. Now, when you interact with the model, also there's this idea of the system prompt. Now, in the actual chat GPT tools, for example, or like if you go into like the web portals, um, you don't really have a chance to adjust the system prompt. It's just whatever system prompt the provider gives you. But if you go a little bit deeper into the AI studios, you'll be able to adjust the system prompt. The system prompt basically like sets the context of the whole conversation for the LLM, right? So you can say things like, oh, you are an Azure developer that has a lot of experience, and basically the LLM will take on that persona when interacting with you. And that I find that that's not 100% necessary to do, but sometimes I get better outputs if I do put the LLM in a specific persona, right? And you use the system prompt for that. One that could be interesting or very important if you're starting to work with more and more or more complicated things in the conversations is the context length and the max tokens response. So when you converse with the LLM, we're used to, especially if you use ChatGPT before, people are used to like, oh, I send a message and I press enter and then I get back something and then I keep talking to the LLM and I get back something, and it kind of almost it makes you feel like the LLM has memory, right? Because it's responding to things that you've said before, and and you can kind of like piggyback on what you already said and just continue the conversation over and over, and it makes you think, or it gives you the impression that the LLM is remembering, but they actually don't have memory, right? What's happening is behind the scenes the entire chat is being sent back to the LLM for input, and then the LLM generates the next output, and then the next output will become part of the next input, and so on, right? So as you converse more and more, the context length will keep getting bigger and bigger. uh, GPT-4, for example, has a 128,000 tokens of context length, and a token is more or less heuristically is like a token is like 0.75 of a word, because the LLMs are not trained in full words, they're trained into tokens. So for example, airport might be 2 tokens, air and port, right? Um, so that's why it's not exactly a match to one for a word. Um, but more or less, it just translates into more words if you're dealing with text, right? So the longer the context length, the more words you can put in into a single message. And that's what you see, might see some other bigger players in the market. Google is very famous because their Gemini model, for example, can, I think it can do 1 million tokens now. So you can pass in even more information in one shot to the Gemini model, right? Compared to GPT that goes up to 128,000. Now, for most of our use cases, I don't know if it will make that much of a difference unless you really want to throw in like several books worth of information to the LLM. But for the day-to-day stuff that we're going to just be covering today, um, probably just the GPT-4 128,000 will be enough. Um, if you're using something like a really older model like GPT 3.5 that only had like 4,000 tokens, that might limit you depending on what you're trying to do. I'll show some of the stuff that I did with SSIS that kind of like I needed a larger context window because the SSIS packages, the text is so verbose that some of the stuff that we were doing for our customers was kind of failing. Uh, and then finally, there's this thing called a temperature. Sometimes you'll see it as like an actual slider that you can move around. If you're working with AI studios, that will be possible. If you're just working with a regular web portal kind of thing, Copilot lets you adjust the temperature by setting the conversation to be more precise, balanced, or more creative, right? The temperature basically says how much randomness or creativeness you allow from the LLM. And the lower the temperature, then the more the LLM will just stick to the patterns that it saw during the training and not branch out more into more randomness. And the higher the temperature it is, then the more random the answers will be, or more creative it will be even giving you answers. Now, for technical work, I don't think we need to boost the creativity much. I found that, I just leave it. If I'm on Copilot, I'll just leave it unbalanced. If I'm on an actual AI studio, I'll just leave it like, usually the default, I believe, is around 1. Uh, I'll leave it somewhere there, like 0.7 to 1. Something that you should play around, see what you're getting about the output. If you feel like the output is just comes out as like too stiff, you could try to crank it up, or if you find that it's going too out out of left field, you can try to bring it down. But it also depends on what the conversation is about, so it's kind of something that you have something that you have to play around with, really. All right. And so what is it useful for DBA, or what I've seen so far that is that might get the DBAs interested in, right? So there's a big promise, and then there's the reality, right? If you listen to some of the bigger industry players, you would think that AI is going to take everybody's job tomorrow. I mean, will it take everybody's job one day? Maybe. I don't know. But at least for today, for today, is the answer is not really, not yet, right? Um, However, I think we also can't just put our head in the ground and pretend like it's not a thing, right? Because I've also met some technical people that have decided to take the opposite approach, and instead of trying to learn about the tool and try to make it so that the tool can help them deliver better work, they just don't want to learn it. They don't want to talk about it. It's all hype. It doesn't work. It's just garbage. And I don't think that is also reasonable, right? I think that people have to accept that there are productivity gains that you can get from AI. There are ease of use gains that you can get from AI. So make something easier to use for you, or give you a boost about how quickly you can get using something, right? There are capability gains. So if you didn't know how to do something, using AI will help you, quicker to learn how to use something. Um, and I think the expectation is going to be very soon is the companies that don't want people to use AI will find will find some solution, maybe like an Azure hosted, or if they use another provider, like a private other provider hosted solution, so that their people can use it. And and the expectation will be that most IT professionals will be expected to leverage it in some way or in some capacity to get some efficiency gains, to get some capability gains, and so on, right? So my opinion about this is that, is AI replacing your job? Not really, but somebody that can use AI well could be the one that replaces your job if you just refuse to learn how to work with the tools, right? So some use cases that I've seen so far, code generation, right? It can help you get up to speed or writing code faster. There's tools there like GitHub Copilot, or you can just even use the regular web portals to do this. I'm going to show you that in the demo as well. Documentation generation, because who likes writing documentation? Nobody. But sometimes it's really useful to have just some quick documentation that you can give to a user, or even documentation that you yourself can just, like, put it on the browser, Control F, find, oh yeah, that's what I was looking for, that's where that store proc is stored, or that's why we did something in a particular way. So it is useful to have it. Nobody likes to write it, so I find that's very, very useful. I'll have an example of something that we worked here at Pythian for a customer, and kind of like what we use documentation generation for. Data modeling, I'll have an example of that on the demos as well. It might, at some point, what I find with data modeling is that the AI can be a booster to get going, so you can, generate something quickly with AI as your launch pad, and then you can fine tune further along, right? And something else that I find a lot of tech people, we don't really like to do is to, write a lot of non-technical stuff and do a lot of like non-technical planning or writing communications, and that's where AI can help a lot with as well too, so that, you know you generate a big draft of something with AI, and then you just fine tune it to your own company or fine tune it to exactly what you're doing. But it saves you a ton of time to having to start over from scratch. And these are just like some of the ones that I've like come up with. There's more, right? Some people say that they've used AI for doing performance tuning. They've used AI for doing incident reporting. They've used AI to generate recommendations for after an incident happens and stuff like that. There's a lot of different use cases. Obviously, I'm not going to cover absolutely everything. These are just the four that I'm going to go through in the demos. But my whole idea also of this session is to just get people's blood flowing, get some ideas going, and you guys will come up with way more things than I have come up to this point. All right, so let's just jump right into the demo. So the first demo let's do is about generating code. All right, I'm going to stop here for a second, just check with Kevin if we have any questions so far.
No questions so far.
All right, sounds good. So let me jump into the demo. So first thing I wanted to show was, like, for example, you can do code generation today with GitHub Copilot. So you might be using Azure Data Studio. If you're not, I mean, it's a pretty cool tool, and it has integration with GitHub Copilot. Uh, right now, this is my Azure Data Studio. If you guys here, I have a data set here in Azure SQL database, and it has a few tables here. It's like a music related data set. So there's some artists, their rates, so how much they charge for licensing of their music, some of their ticket sales, how many times they've been played online, and details on some users and stuff like that, right? Very simple, very small schema, just to show GitHub Copilot. So I do have Copilot. So you see here I have status ready here. I was talking about this with Kevin earlier as well. So Copilot, you do have to pay for it, right? It's not free. It's not super expensive. I think it's about 10 USD per month or something like that. And you don't have to just use it with Azure Data Studio, of course. You can use it with VS Code. You can use Copilot with the full-blown Visual Studio, and so on, right? So for example, let's see, hopefully Copilot kicks in here. Let's see, so I have here language .tsql, and then I have a comment that says create a view to join artist rates with artist ticket sales. And then, all right, so let's see. Usually Copilot kicks in and it gives you suggestions. Maybe it's because I just pasted it. So I'll give it a chance and see. Let's see what create a view to join artist rates with artist. What is it? Ticket sales. So there we go. Now these are the suggestions here. So create view, artist, rates and sales as, and there's the select. So selecting some data here from, and then join, then the join condition, all right? So this is what we got so far. This is AI generated. Now, you guys will notice right away we got this squiggly here, right? And this is the main issue I've had so far with Copilot. And I'll talk about like some alternatives here of how to deal with this, right? But you'll see here, it says right away, the multi-part identifiers, artist ticket sales dot ticket sales could not uh, could not be bound. So if I go into artist ticket sales here, open it up, so we see all the columns. And you can see that Copilot said it was ticket sales. And actually, it's called ticket sales dollars, right? So what I found is that it's not super smart when dealing with Azure Data Studio, at least, right? Um, I think if you look at when Copilot works with VS Code, for example, then some of the information about like the text on the code files gets sent to Copilot for it to generate code. But Azure Data Studio, so far where I've played with it, doesn't seem to be sending the schema information into Copilot. So Copilot has to basically make up what it thinks are the names of the fields, and then we get things like this. And of course, if I want to create this view, now I don't think this is going to run because it's not going to be able to bind the column names, right? And if you guys see here, even also in the join clause, it assumed that there would be an artist ID column. You see that? And actually, actually, there's no artist ID. There's an artist name. So you would have to join them by artist name. All right. So let's say, I got disappointed by the Copilot implementation. I think AI is, crap at this point. All right. Well, what can we do about it? So here, depending on what you're allowed to use, you could use either Copilot, or maybe we'll have to use the chat playground, but let's try using, in this case, Copilot. Copilot is free. Um, and what I did was I extracted the schema of the database. So you guys see here, I have all my T-SQL with all the names of the columns, all the names of the tables. So I'm going to select this all. I'm just going to go ahead and copy it. And then I go, all right. Hello, Copilot. I need help writing the SQL code. I will give you the schema of the database and then request the code I want. Here is the schema. And then let me paste in the schema. All right. All right, so Copilot is ready for my schema. Paste all that in there. And you guys see here, now we got an issue. It says maximum character limit reached, right? So this is where the context window comes into play. So even if I wanted to do this with Copilot, the issue here is my schema for this particular database is too big. So this is a limitation you might face if you try to use the free tools, right? If you go into the paid tools, then is when you get, access to the bigger schema sizes. I think this might work on ChatGPT. Let's try to do it on ChatGPT. So let me go to ChatGPT. We'll just copy paste this. Where's my previous message? Let's see if it blows up on ChatGPT. We'll use the Azure Studio. Here's the schema, and then I'm going to give the schema to ChatGPT. So this one went all the way till the end. Let's see. All right, so ChatGPT says, thanks for providing the schema. Feel free to request something now. All right, so ChatGPT did not bend on the size of the context window, so that's something to keep in mind. And then all we want to do, like I said before, is create a view to join artist sales, artist rates with artist ticket sales. And let's see. All right. Usually, as usually happens on live demos, that's when we things stop working. But hopefully we'll get a generation from ChatGPT here. Notice I'm in the free version, so that doesn't help either. But I'm trying to use for free tools that people might have access to as well. So if you're using free, you might have to wait a little bit. But let's see if it generates or not. Usually I can think it times out after a little while. Just let's see. If not, we'll stop generation and we'll try it again. Just copy paste it. Come on, GPT. See, guys, this is also why you don't have to worry so much about your job being replaced right away. The stuff is not perfect yet. Okay, let's do it again. Let's do it, regenerate.
Speaking of this, Warner, how long is the timeout session for any session within ChatGPT, or do you know?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it usually there we go. See, this came back to life. I think after a couple of minutes it times out, but all right. So what I wanted to showcase here, right? So it did generate it here. I can copy this code, go back to Azure Data Studio, paste it, and let me open this. Select this, run it. And you see this one does complete successfully, right? Um, so we can see here ChatGPT doesn't have the issue that Copilot has, right? Because I fed it the actual schema. This all goes back to the whole prompt engineering thing, right? So basically, when we were working with Copilot, is we're telling Copilot create a view of these two tables and not giving it any extra information, right? And then Copilot has to assume a bunch of things that it end up being incorrect, right? So there's no ticket sales column. There's ticket sales dollars. Now GPT gets it right because we actually pass in the schema for GPT as the very first message, right? And then it also realizes that it can join an artist ID, right? So it joins on artist name. So it gets that right as well because we gave it more information, right? So as long as you provide the information of the schema, then it works well. Now, obviously, um, this is just like a little play database with 5 tables and a couple of store procs. You probably have something in prod that's way bigger, has a bunch more code, but you don't have to copy paste the entire schema either. I did that because, I was just trying to make a demo. But if you know that, okay, I need to create a view that does this and that, and it uses like 3 or 4 of these tables, depending on the complexity of the view, of course, you might just write it yourself. But if it's something that you want to give it a shot with AI, you don't you all you have to do is provide the schema of the objects that are involved in it, right? You don't necessarily have to um, put in the entire database schema, right? If there's a bunch of stuff that is not necessary, then you don't really need to pass it in, right? Obviously, you would just need to pass in this case, I could have, for example, just passed in the schema for artist rates and artist ticket sales, and the result would have been correct as well, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so that's cool, and that's for code generation, right? So we tried using Copilot. Copilot blows up because of the maximum character limit. I'm wondering it doesn't tell me what is the actual maximum character limit on Copilot. Mm, but it did say here maximum character limit reached. But ChatGPT still works. ChatGPT, I still have this. This is my free account, so this is working right now on free. Now, another conversation I have a lot with people, and I'll just cover it now before we move on to the next demo is, okay, cool, but my company doesn't allow me to upload my schema information into one of these free tools because they think it's proprietary to us, and they think it's important that, it doesn't go into the training data for these models because all these conversations get fed back into the training for the models, right? Um, Fair enough. That's a good objection. I don't object to that. So what I would say with most people is we have to, try to convince your company to move into something like the Azure hosted version. So you guys should be able to see on the screen right now. This is Azure Open AI Studio, Boop, right? And it basically allows you to host GPT models. So if we go here, you guys see here, I have 2 deployments of GPT. This is the GPT-4 original model with a 32,000 token context, and this is GPT-4 Turbo. Uh, Not the latest version of GPT-4 uh, Turbo, but it's one that came out, I forget, maybe middle of last year, and I still use it for what I need to do. And then if I go into the chat here, you'll see it's very handy, like the chat experience when you're using the Azure hosted version. It does give you more information. Like here it says 11 out of 32,000 tokens to be sent, right? So if I paste the whole database schema again, it'll count the tokens. let me type it here, for example. And then you'll see here it says 16, it went already there, 16, 14, 1600 tokens out of 32,000 to be sent, right? So that's how many tokens they are to send my database schema over, right? So the Azure AI Studio gives you a lot more control over these things, right? Because it's more of a power user developer experience, right? And you can switch your parameters here. You'll see here I have the temperature over here somewhere. Here it is. Okay, so the default on the Azure AI Studio is 0.7, for example. And the system prompt, as I mentioned, is very generic. If you don't adjust it, it just says you're an AI assistant, helps people find information. That's all it says, right? And now the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because, again, people might say, well, I'm not allowed to use the free stuff and my company doesn't want me to put proprietary stuff on free stuff. Okay, well, maybe you can make a business case that they could use the Azure OpenAI Studio instead. This is Azure OpenAI is hosted 100% by Microsoft. It's governed under all the legal terms of Microsoft, saying that they will not be trained on your data. Your conversations are not public, and this is hosted inside your Azure subscription, built for your Azure subscription. So it is 100% not going to be used for training any other models, right? This lives under your Azure tenant. And that may be more comfortable for some companies to allow the use of this instead of allowing like just ChatGPT or Copilot that is free and then it gets consumed. Sorry, and then it might get trained, right? So that's something to keep about. All right, so next thing I wanted to show, the next use case I wanted to show was about documentation generation. And the way I wanted to show this is we had a customer, for example, a while ago that wanted to help us document SSIS packages. And the reason for that is that they had somebody that developed a bunch of SSIS packages and they never documented them. And they just left and they left them with all these packages and pipelines that are doing a bunch of stuff. And they had no idea what they were actually doing, right? So what we said is, well, actually, this sounds like a really good use case for Gen AI, right? What if we could get Gen AI to generate the documentation for the SSIS packages, right? So we could write a program that goes inside the SSIS package, takes out the DTSX definition, and generates documentation for it just based out of reading the XML. So I'm going to show you guys what the output of this is. This is a DTSX file. So that represents an SSIS package, right? So instead of having like a human being open the SSIS package and look on the screen and look at all the little boxes and type, oh, this package is doing this or that, what if we just grab this whole thing, the DTSX file, which is an XML, right? You just grab it and we're going to feed it into GPT. So I'm going to open here the prompt. Sorry, guys. All right, so look at this. I'm going to maximize it. So it says, please analyze the following SSIS package XML, provide the output as the following: name of the package, sources, list all the sources referenced in the package, targets, list all the targets referenced in the package, transformations, list all the transformations, description, plain English language explanation of what the package is doing. Following is the package definition. So I'm just gonna go ahead, paste this whole thing in, actually, and end of the XML definition. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this whole thing up. Obviously, this step was automated and programmed for that particular project, but just like, for demos, and I can't really use proprietary stuff in the demo. But the mechanism was pretty much the same, right? So a little bit of prompt engineering mixed in with the contents of the actual SSIS package. Go ahead, let's see. Now, notice here, we are at 8,500 out of 32,000 tokens to be sent. So this particular package, it still falls within the boundaries of what is allowed by this model. so it won't throw an error, right? All right, and it's coming. Output is being streamed now. I got it out of a MS SQL Tips article, the package, so you'll see some of it referenced here as well. So props to the author there that just was doing a little sample of some SSIS stuff. I just grabbed it to use it for the demo. All right, so you see, all right, so we got the output here from GPT. And based on the provided SSIS, analyze the data as follows. Here's the name, SSMS import from Excel. Sources, an Excel source, name dim geography. Data is fetched using OnlyDB from a file path specified in source connection Excel. Targets, OnlyDB destination, named MS SQL tips SSIS tutorial, .dbo, the dim geography, blah, blah, blah. Transformations, there's an execute SQL task, it's running, has these fields, the data flow task, writes it in, and then there's a full-blown description here of what it's doing, right? So let's go back in time about 3 years from today, and we get this same request, right? For a customer that wants to generate documentation for all their SSIS packages, and they don't have something. Now you have to start looking at like maybe a commercial tool that already does something like this. God forbid you actually have to sit down and do this manually. And now we have this other, way to do it, right? We just wrote a little bit of scripting that extracted all the SSIS packages into text, and then we wrote like a loop that did like calls into the OpenAI, Azure OpenAI API, and passed in all the different package definitions, and then it printed out all these outputs from GPT, and boom, you have documentation generated automatically, right? And this is just for one SSIS package. It's just one example. Anything that is text, we could generate documentation for, right? So if you have like a really lengthy store proc and you want to document it, same approach, right? You could write a prompt similar to the one that we wrote here, where you say, hey, this is this type of thing. You could say, please analyze the following T-SQL view, provide the output as name of the view, source tables in the view, logic for joins in the view, description of what the view is doing. Following is the view definition. Boom, you put in the SQL text, and you get the output just like this one, explaining what the view does, what the view is doing, right? Maybe it's even for your own mental health. As a DBA, how many times do we get a request that's just like, hey, so on and so forth, so and so is requesting that we change the logic of this view to do X now instead of Z. And then you open the view and it's this hodgepodge of like hundreds of lines of stuff, and you're like, oh my god, how am I even going to do this? And start reading what the view is doing. How much easier would it be to just like, generate documentation of what the view is, read it over, then make sense with the code. Then you could even ask GPT to maybe do the modification themselves, and then you review it before you send it back to the user, right? So this is the way we have to try to think creatively with all these tools, right? And generating documentation, big one in my opinion, because nobody likes to do this manually. Nobody. So really good thing. And like right here in this conversation, for example, that I'm doing with Azure OpenAI Studio, it's 100% private. This conversation would not be used for training um, Microsoft models, right? This is inside my tenant and would not be used for any of that. All right, I'm going to stop here. Any other questions so far before I head into the last couple of demos? Good. All right. So other demo I wanted to show you, which I also thought has been really handy, is for action plans. All right. So I'm going to open this here. Let me clear this chat. Clear the chat. Okay. And then let me open this one, action plans. So check this out. I said, let me add the word wrap here. So as a virtual assistant with expertise in cloud migrations, particularly Microsoft Azure, can you provide a detailed step-by-step action plan for migrating an on-premises SQL Server 2016 server to a new Azure VM? Include all the key phases such as assessment, planning, migration, validation, optimization, and post-migration tasks. For each one of the phases, list the following: activities to complete and by whom, deliverables to produce, services and tools that we'll be using, key risks and possible mitigation. actions. So as you guys can see, I'm trying to be as specific as possible as to what I want to see in the output for the LLM, right? And this could be a request that any of you could be getting any day, right? Like, hey, we need to migrate from point X to point B. How do we do it? Put together a plan to do it, and then we'll staff it, right? And it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of writing, a lot of like breakdowns and stuff, and it would definitely be helpful to not have to start from scratch. Now, it doesn't mean that whatever you get from the LLM is, just copy paste it and forget about it, right? No, you have to like be smart. You have to like um, go over it, make sure that the LLM's response is it makes sense, right? But it'll help you get going quite a bit, right? So that's the good thing about it. You don't have to start completely from scratch. You can actually use the LLM's output to help you create your final plan, right? So let's just finish here, and then let's see here, for example. All right, happy to assist. Here's a high-level action plan. Assessment phase activities, identify all the SQL instances, workloads, applications carried out by the IT team or database admins, deliverables, the inventory of the SQL servers, instances, applications, and the dependencies, tools you might use, um, key risks and mitigation, right? The risk of missing out on some apps or some dependencies, planning phase, same thing, activities developed by migration strategy, all this stuff carried out by these people, deliverables, and so on. Migration phase, validation phase, optimization phase, post-migration tasks, monitor the system, manage. And then the cool thing about this is just like the high-level plan, right? And it's good. Something else that I find is really useful is to try to chunk the conversation so that you can then create more output, but not in one shot, right? So you'll get a lot more quality if you kind of like divide all the different things into different parts of the conversation. So what I mean by that is that now we use GPT to create this level of detail for 6 phases, okay? But what if I want more detail? So instead of just writing a prompt here that just says, please give me as much detail as humanly possible, GPT, what I'll do is I'll take this, and let's say we're in the assessment phase, and first activity says identify all the SQL Server instances. And let's say, maybe I'm a little bit iffy. How should I do that? So, you just go ahead and say, oh, thanks. I like to be polite to the LLM, even though it's not really necessary. Thanks, GPT. Let's deep dive on assessment phase, identify all the SQL servers. How would I go about doing that, right? And then, now the LM is just going to deep dive into that particular step. And depending on what the level of detail it is that you might think that is required for your action plan, maybe you will just take this particular thing, and you would break down that first activity into, okay, now this is the ways that we can do activity 1 is going to be, well, either with our manual inventory, with the SSMS browse option, using a PowerShell discovery script, and so on, right? And you just, grab this stuff, and now, boom, now you broke down first activity, right? And if you wanted to, you can take this approach, you know, add like to infinity, right? Like you can just say like, okay, no, I like the idea of the PowerShell script. Okay, GPT, like how would I go about if I wanted to do it with a PowerShell script? And then you'll get the option of, the type of PowerShell script that you would need and so on, right? And you'll be able to do this with any of these other activities. So I found that for planning, it's been really, really useful to take away easily, like, the first 40-50% of a plan, because then I'll just take all this stuff, I'll put it all together, and then I start to fine tune to what we need to do and really adjust the plan that I got from the AI into the plan that we need for a specific customer. In your case, if you're an in-house DBA, a plan that applies to your specific company. All right. And last one I wanted to show you is the ability to do diagrams. And I could use Azure OpenAI as well if I wanted to, but I wanted to just show some of the other tools. Like I mentioned before, this is Claude. Claude is the one that's made by Anthropic. And the cool thing about Claude is that it has this thing called artifacts that it generates when you talk to the LLM. So for example, I just say like, okay, really easy, message says, I would like to collaborate with you to create a mermaid. Mermaid is a JavaScript library for making diagrams. A mermaid ERD, an entity relationship diagram. I'm trying to create the data model of a new app that will track library borrowing. Let's start with the following entities: a library location, a collection, an artifact, and a user. So I'm gonna go ahead and just copy paste this. Put it in here. Talk with Claude. Boom. Isn't that cool? So this is the nice thing about, like I said, the Claude artifacts capability. This is free Claude, by the way. I don't even pay for Claude. And not only does it generate the mermaid code, it has an included preview of the diagram. Isn't that nice? Boom, in one shot. And the cool thing about this is because mermaid is used by a lot of different tools. So I can actually take that mermaid code, and for example, at Pythian, um, we use a lot of different generating diagramming tools, but one of them is Lucid. And maybe some of you use Lucid as well. So I'm just going to create like a blank Lucid diagram. And now Lucid has this thing where it supports diagrams as code too. So I can create a new mermaid diagram in Lucid and paste the mermaid code from Claude, and the diagram right now is just immediately translates directly into Lucid as well. And now it's inside, instead of just being randomly on like the Claude portal, now I brought the diagram into, my organization's diagramming tool where I can, fine tune it, share it with other people, collaborate, and so on, right? So that's the last demo I wanted to show, because a lot of people don't know if they realize how powerful this stuff has gotten, even for things like diagramming. So I thought that was really, really cool capability of not only creating diagrams as code and then being able to import it somewhere else, but just right away, boom, on the even on the web experience, you get the visual representation of the diagram. Thought that was pretty cool. All right, so I'm gonna leave you guys with that one. Last one, let's just a quick recap. So the space is very competitive right now. That's why I wanted to show a few of the different tools that we have. In my opinion, AI is here to stay. Some people might say, oh, it's a big bubble, it's all hype. I don't know. I think I just showed you some stuff that you can't deny the efficiency gains that you will get if you start adopting some of these things. As I mentioned before, I think all IT professionals have to familiarize themselves with all these tools. You guys, DBAs in general, we're not some kind of exception. And the biggest threat to your job or career right now is not really AI itself, because it's not that smart yet, but it is somebody that knows how to use AI well, right? So get familiar with interacting with the LLMs. If you can use the free tools, go ahead and use the free tools. If your company has your specific tool that they can use, they're allowed to use, then get really good at using that. If you're not allowed to use anything, maybe you can convince somebody to let you use that private implementation, such as like the Azure OpenAI Studio and things like that. And experiment with, next time you get some kind of request, think about like, oh, I wonder maybe if I could use AI to be more efficient at this, to get it done faster, to get it done in a better quality, so that it's not so mechanic for me, and see how it goes. And also, just right now, obviously, like I said, don't just copy paste whatever AI output you get. That's not the right way to do it. Always verify what you're getting, that it makes sense, that it's something that is safe to share, that is safe to run, before you go ahead and run it on the computer. Very important. All right, and that's pretty much all the material for today. I want to see if you guys have any questions so far.
No questions, at least so far.
All
If
right, so
everyone,
I hope there's no questions, because everything was so clear, not because it's completely useless.
it was for me, at least that's what mattered, Warner.
All right, sounds good. Okay, no, people are saying it was informative. Okay, sounds good. At least, hopefully, like I said, there's no questions because everything was approachable, and not because you guys think this will never apply to your job. And like I said before, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Let's connect, and You know, also, if you guys think of anything else, like something that you would like to do a deep dive that we covered today, um, you know, message me or message Kevin. Here I am, like sending people over to Kevin. Sorry, Kevin, see if you're not busy enough. But if you don't feel comfortable messaging me, you can always message Kevin, and I'm sure he'll get back to me with ideas. I would love to, you know, if any of this is particularly interesting, we could do a deep dive on any of these, right? On any of the use cases that we talked about, and go into more details into either code generation or more how do you generate more documentation, or doing like even more detailed action plans, validating them and all that stuff, all in AI enabled, right? So if you think about any other ideas, my inbox is open, and I just completely suggested Kevin's too. So that's all for today, guys.
Thank you all so much more. This has been awesome. I really enjoyed some of this. Like you said, I wasn't even aware that you could do ERD diagrams in Chat GPT and whatnot. That's going to make it real helpful.
Yeah. One question. I use this concept with IBM World, but Copilot mixed and matched different operating system codes and generated something. The reason I understand and not understand the different flavor. Yeah, yeah. So this is this is you basically. So that's a question from Thiru. So Thiru, you basically experienced kind of like the initial thing, my very first demo, how Copilot didn't get it right with the Azure Data Studio, right? Because it's missing the context of the code. And also something that you might find is if you're working on a product that might not be very popular. Yeah, exactly. So if it's something that is code for products that are not super popular, then it might not be good quality, because it's just not really, a lot of it is not really in the training data set, right? So for generating SQL, I found this good. For generating Python, it's good because there's so much Python code that it got trained on. Um, Depending on what the product is that you're trying to do, yeah, your mileage may vary and the code quality might not be that good. That's why I I use in the demo intentionally SQL, because it can be really good at generating SQL as long as you give it the schema, right? Depending on what you're trying to do, like some other kind of tool, it might not be that good for generating code yet, right? That's also where I also use the other use cases, because the documentation generation and the diagramming and all that other stuff, I find that those are more robust compared to just, you know, pure code generation. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day.
So with that, I want to remind everyone that we are actually meeting next week. Marco Ubino is actually talking on Azure and SQL Server disaster recovery for everyone. So with that, please come join us next week. Thanks again, Warner, for all this goodness. Maybe you can even create up some diagrams and such for disaster recovery. That'd be awesome.
There you go. All right.
With
See
that,
you
thank
guys.
you all so much. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.